So down, which is good news, but only a bit. Down from 11.1 to 10.7%. I guess the key question is, has this peaked and is it going to carry on going down?
As we predicted yesterday, Mark, inflation is down a little bit. That's certainly welcome. A lot of people are saying this could be the peak in inflation, given that the really big price rises were around this time last year, as we approached that war in Ukraine and then the war in Ukraine itself. You can see here from the graphic, and GBNews radio listeners, I'll explain. Inflation in November, there it is, 10.7%. That means that the consumer price index, which measures that basket of goods and services, in November was 10.7% above where it was in November 2021. That's up from the October figure when it was 11.1. And as you mentioned in your introduction there, Mark, it isn't the luxuries that are more expensive, it's the necessities like food. If we move on to the next graphic, you can see that food inflation was 16.5%.
Wow.
Bread was up 20%.
Cheapers.
Eggs were up 24%. Milk was up 34% and pasta was 37%. All those numbers, the average price for those goods in November compared to November 2021. So, you know, everyone trying to budget for Christmas is when you get lots of food in, family over, all the rest of it. Food's always a very big part of any family's Christmas in terms of expenditure. And we know that food prices are much higher than the headline rate of inflation.
Yeah, we know alcohol prices gone up, turkeys, of course, because of bird flu going up. However, there is a bit of a glimmer of good news, and that is that the petrol prices that came down on the forecourt helped to lower this inflation rate. But we know that can be pretty volatile.
It can, and the likes of Howard Cox of Fair Fuel UK. OK, Howard is sponsored by the Road Haulage Association. But, you know, he's still dealing in facts on the ground, and the facts on the ground are that the oil price has come down a lot more than the petrol and diesel price has. So there is still a concern that some energy companies, some oil companies, not so much the independent petrol stations, but maybe the big oil companies with their own networks of petrol stations, are slightly reluctant to lower petrol prices as oil prices come down. But in general, petrol prices and diesel prices are still, inflation in those has come down a bit, and I think that will continue.
Yeah, and this is key, because it's not just us filling our tanks, of course. This feeds into transport costs for those big supermarkets, getting goods from A to B.
A big chunk of the cost of any good is the cost of getting the materials to the factory where the good is made, getting the good to the wholesaler, then to the retailer. So at every stage, high transport costs feed into inflation. The real blot on the landscape, in general, this lower inflation is good news, though it's still high. It means hopefully
double-digit,
a lower interest rate rise tomorrow from the Bank of England.
But
the real blot on the landscape, though, is if there is a serious deterioration in the situation between Russia and Ukraine, if the West and Russia become really belligerent, if the Kremlin wants to really turn the screw and limit gas supplies even more, if OPEC oil exporters cartel, in conjunction with Russia, the so-called OPEC Plus group, if they want to really put the pressure on, they can have their thumb over the sort of Western world's economic windpipe. If any of those big geopolitical things happen, that will feed straight into UK inflation.
And it goes straight up. And Belarus, of course, in indications that they may become involved. However, just talking about the Bank of England tomorrow, 12 noon we'll get the interest rate decision on the base rate. They were looking at a 13% cap on inflation. They thought it was sort of cap off there. So is it possible that they may relax a little bit more? It
may be. You're right. Their central assumption was that inflation would peak at 13%. If they think inflation is going to peak indeed at 11.1%, because last month was the peak, then they may not need to raise interest rates as much as they thought they would.
They will still go up.
They'll still go up. Instead of going up by 0.75%, 75 basis points tomorrow, it'll be more like 0.5%, even 0.25%. And what that means, Mark, is in the money markets, the mortgage companies, when they borrow money wholesale to sell the money, to lend the money to us retail, that means they may get the money cheaper. And as long as there's competition in the mortgage market, that's a big if, then people remortgaging will get their finance a bit cheaper than they otherwise would. Still a lot more than this time last year. Interest rates are going up across the world, but not going up by as much as we thought they were maybe this time last week.
So a bit of a Christmas present, but quite a small one.